me show these suckers how to ball out here. Oh, man, let's get this together here. Oh, layup. Oh, shot. Oh, three. Oh, it's like Brick City out here. Mid-range. Oh, my goodness. I can't buy a bucket out here. I missed the whole damn basket. Oh, my goodness. What's going on, man? My game is looking trash. Oh, here we go. Black Power Media shirt. Now we cooking. Trees. I'm taking on three of y'all with these right here. Between the legs. Oh, my goodness. Behind the back. Layup. Oh, did he just do a reverse? He is in beast mode out here. I ain't got to look. It's falling. Oh, my goodness. This guy is going 3, 2, 1. Kobe. Nice. Black Power Media, baby. Nice. Empower yourself. Go get you some of that Black Power Media again. Right here, blackpowermedia.org. Yeah.
I mix what I like. All right. What's up, world? Welcome back to another edition of I Mix What I Like right here at Black Power Media. Again, I'm Jared Ball. Very happy to be your host. Please do, right out the gate, like, share, subscribe, join our Patreon, blackpowermedia.org. A lot of special content coming there and more on its way. And just checking. Okay, I thought I heard something. Right, and make sure you have the bell rung so you don't miss anything. All the other content coming up, a lot of good stuff coming. So please do support however you can in whatever way possible. And welcome to those who are here, who are joining us live, and to those who will see this later. Welcome to you as well. So we want to continue our ongoing conversation here as this little crew has evolved. Very happy that we can have some discussion of real football. And I know for a lot of people here in the United States, they're wrapped up in some other season happening, hand egg, as I was belatedly, and I didn't even realize it's been on FIFA and everything, on my video game and everything, this hand egg reference. I was so late to that. But very happy that we can have our continuing discussion with this roundtable. We will expect Robert to join us, but bringing back the crew as is formed so far. Mutanda, Daniel, welcome. Everybody's links and socials are already in the show description. So I encourage people to check them out. And as folks might remember, Mutanda, coach, former player, professional, father of soccer, dad, all that. Daniel, very much involved in covering the sport, and a writer. His Substack is linked, podcast linked in the show description. Welcome, fellas. Welcome.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us. Good to see you guys.
I hope Robert can get here. I'm very excited for us to pick up where we left off, which was and finally get to what we were promising, to talk specifically about Pelé's politics. And I did. It's linked in the show description. Read again Daniel's commemorative piece on Pelé, which is fantastic. I can't wait for us to get into that. Yeah. No, seriously, really good job.
Appreciate it.
And but that said, let me invite you all, if there's anything in the footballing world that you wanted to maybe start with, or in giving Robert a chance to get here, or anything you're following, anything.
Go for it. No.
You go.
You're the coach.
No, but I just wanted. I want to speak directly to you and hear what you have to say, because when we Jared, I don't know if you know, Daniel and I got together on his podcast. I was very honored that he invited me on, talking tactics, and one of the things we got into was just the clubs that we follow, that we support. I remember, Daniel, I tried to give you didn't respond to me, but I gave you a little hard time about your support of Chelsea.
We don't have to do that publicly. We don't have to.
But it was public. I thought it was public. It was on your podcast, and I did miss it. I apologize. I will go back and check it.
No. It's just
Jared asked what's going on in the football
Chelsea,
world.
we can talk Chelsea. We can talk Chelsea if you want to talk Chelsea. It's
Chelsea.
okay. It's okay.
I'm just. Hey, listen, they got a win finally, but I was laughing because there's a reason I was laughing. But I'm inviting you
Mm.
to just speak on
Nah,
it.
I mean, it's been now. I should couch this by saying, for the last 6 years, let's say, I've been retreating my position as a Chelsea fan. So I speak about it more as like a sociological, anthropological project that I've continued, but like it's left my heart. Like the results don't hit me like they did, like they used to. But whenever it comes up in discussion, like who do you support? I say Chelsea because that's the truth. So yeah, since the new American ownership has arrived, I mean it's been, kind of crazy. Like they're spending billions of euros, pounds, dollars, whichever currency you like. Um, and bruh, the team is not functioning correctly. They sacked the Champions League winning manager. They hired somebody from Brighton. Basically, they bought Brighton without buying Brighton, and that didn't go well. They sacked the dude, I think, after 6 months. They hired Frank Lampard, which is its own mistake. Then they brought in Maurizio Pochettino. They've signed players to like nine-year contracts, 8-year contracts, which is something that's really never been done before in football. So, and the players that they're signing are not proven players, Mudryk and Jackson and these kinds of dudes. There's maybe like one or two that are proven. Enzo Fernandez was young player at the World Cup, but yeah. Suffice it to say that the collective hasn't quite jailed yet. So they're bottom half of the table.
Who are these owners? Who owns Chelsea?
So they were owned by Roman Abramovich, who is a Russian billionaire. But because of his ties with Vladimir Putin, rather, when the war kicked off in Ukraine, he had to sell the club. The Brits effectively made him sell the club, and he had issues with the British government even before the sale, to where he wasn't allowed entry into the country. So it went through a bidding process, and the people who won are Todd Bowley, who has stakes in the LA Dodgers and the LA Lakers, I believe. And he's on is it the Hollywood the Hollywood Press, Hollywood Film something. He's something with the Golden Globes, and Clear Lake Capital, which is, I think, private equity company. So they spent like 4.5 billion pounds to buy Chelsea. And they came in saying, Chelsea's not doing what they should be doing in terms of marketing and the commercial aspect, and we could do things better on the football pitch with their kind of digital. I don't know if it's AI or just kind of like technology, kind of. Yeah, this guy. They're kind of data driven analysis. That's what they were. That's what they're on. But like the data that they're using is clearly wrong, because Chelsea are 11th after spending again $1 billion. So
well, he did go to the London School of Economics, if that helps. That's his connection to the English Premier League,
that helps me not. Not at all.
Carlisle Group. Wow.
He invested in Chuck E. Cheese. That's new information.
Wow.
So yeah, that's the new owner. The Dodgers and the Sparks. So not the Lakers, but the Sparks.
And DraftKings.
Oh yeah, it's all right there.
Is that not weird?
Oh, it is the Lakers. There it is. Bowley and Walker speaking of Lakers.
Oh, it's weird.
Wait a minute. What? So I won't belabor the point, but years ago I peeked in at DraftKings, and then there was this, what I thought should have been an existential crisis for them, of a scandal where it was reported that people working for DraftKings were taking advantage of the algorithm to rig their victories. So I immediately took my $2 and left. I was, that was it. So they've somehow survived without me. But once I saw that, I said, wait a minute, if it's that easy, if the rigging is that, and now to see that the owners of teams are owners of DraftKings, that just seems
I mean, the betting conversation in football is perhaps one that we could do a whole episode on, about them being on the kit sponsors,
right,
about the hoarding advertisement. I don't know if you know about Ivan Toney, the Brentford striker, who was I think he's been banned 6 months because he made some number of bets on himself. So, and what's ironic is the Brentford kit sponsor, or their jersey sponsor, is a betting app. So, or actually,
Bet
it's
360, is that them?
It's an online, because it's called Hollywood Bets, I believe.
Wow.
So it's kind of ironic that your star striker gets banned for making bets, and like the kit sponsor or your club.
Maybe the real punishment was that he didn't use the sponsor's platform when betting, so they were like, "How dare you!"
If I remember it right, he used Sky Bet, not Hollywood Bets. But either way, it's I mean, and there's been a long line of maybe not a long line, but a long enough line of players who've kind of gotten in trouble for that. Joey Barton, Kieran Trippier, I believe, who now plays for Newcastle, got in some trouble. So it's interesting that, you kind of come up in a culture, like especially in the UK, and it's almost getting to that status here in the United States, where there's a lot of betting. DraftKings, what's the other one? It was DraftKings and something else. Do you guys know?
And it was DraftKings and FanDuel. That's it.
FanDuel.
Right.
So like those advertisements are becoming more prominent on television and whatnot. But in the UK, I don't know if people know who Ray Winston is, but he gets on Bet 365. Like he does that whole thing. So my friends in the UK are always quite critical of how inundated the betting is. But then the footballers have to grow up in the same climate. So it makes sense that a small percentage of footballers will be kind of caught up in the wave, so to speak.
So just quickly, let me bring up our fourth. Welcome, Robert Wilson, author, among other things, author of the Football Manifesto, linked in the show description. Welcome to the show. Good to see you again. We were just catching up on.
We were filibustering for you, bro.
Filibustering and Daniel's struggling support of Chelsea. Mutanda, who's your squad, by the way?
God, Jesus.
Who do you support?
I enjoy watching Man City.
But you see, he says I enjoy what he didn't say I support. You see, you're getting out of it.
Yeah, I'm not. Because I don't. That's a whole nother conversation. But I support. I watch Manchester City more than any other team.
Is for
Mutanda,
enjoyment?
How long have you been in the United States?
Oh man, you're dating me, Robert. I got here in 1990.
1990, and you were how old?
I am 37.
Okay, so
he does have a Wikipedia page, so it's not like it's not public information.
So you were a kid when you arrived in the States.
I was a kid. I was 4 years old. Yeah.
I was 6.
And it's really interesting. Down here in Brazil, the allegiance to a club is a lifetime commitment.
Yeah. Is this the part where you tell me I'm not a real football fan because I
know? No, I'm just telling you because you grew up in the United States. You don't have that kind of, there's no football culture in the United States,
Yeah. Well, it's different. I hear that.
And so it's very different. I mean, down here, I'm a Flamengo supporter, but my wife supports Botafogo. Her whole family was a Botafogo, support group. And it's really interesting. They're even, people leave club membership in their wills to their children. So it's like this down here, man. It's like serious. It's so serious. So it's such a shame that you haven't hooked up with a club yet. We'll have to solve that for you somehow.
Well, yes and no, but I respectfully. So I hear that, and I do think there's something missing. And at the same time, I think all of us would agree, all 4 of us here would agree that pro sports, of course, football and other sports, are inherently problematic sometimes when you think about the institutions and the confluence with capitalism and geopolitics, all these other things that are so important for people's lives. So I say that just to say, I find my lane, and Daniel, you and I will get into this as we, right, the way, and that's why I answer the way I do when you ask me who I support. But I find my lane of enjoying the sport. Of course, I'm a diehard, passionate about the sport, but enjoying watching a team without saying that I fully support the team, because I like to distance myself from the institutions, right? I don't want to drink that narcotic. Like, I'm not, and it's not because I'm fair weather. I have strong opinions about City. And I want them to win. I want them to be successful. But I also don't want to be inundated with this, like, I'm City until I die. And it's,
here's the real question though.
Us against the world. And I'm not, like, I don't, So anyway, but Robert, I hear you. Hey, if I had been born in Brazil, or if I had lived there since I was 4, I probably would be, Fluminense, everything, or whatever club,
Yeah.
Who did you grow up supporting? Because there's no way you grew up supporting Manchester City. So this is the real question.
No, I did. Yeah, but who I support. But here's the thing, though, Daniel. My allegiance isn't to any team. It isn't. Who I grew up supporting, if you ask me, my boyhood club is the Seattle Sounders.
Oh, okay.
Seattle Sounders. And I can say that because I remember. To Robert's point, I went to games with my dad. Right. I was at the game. I mean, the Sounders are MLS now, right? But they were A-League. They were NASL, A-League Sounders. I remember going to a game they played in a A-League final against the Rochester Rhinos in a Memorial Stadium in Seattle, which is like decrepit, old building in downtown Seattle that's not really used for professional sports much. But I stormed the field with my dad. All right, maybe he was in the stands and kind of let me go. I was like, in my teenage years, and I remember storming the field. It meant that much to me. Right. So I grew up against, and then I was fortunate enough, to play against them when I at some point. But so I and even when I played for the Portland,
that part had to be pretty cool. I didn't mean to jump in.
It was behind the door.
Play though, and that had to have been pretty cool.
So admittedly, my claim, I just say this and I'll pass off. But my claim to one of my, I guess, claims to fame really is, it was cool playing for the Portland Timbers. I signed for the Timbers, but even when I signed for the Timbers, I was always a Sounders fan, right? But you're playing for the rival team. But I played in a behind closed doors scrimmage. It was like a end of a season scrimmage, and I ended up playing against like Freddie Ljungberg. You guys remember Freddie Ljungberg, Arsenal?
I do.
Yeah, because he was on the Sounders for a little bit, and we played them at the practice facility or something. So that was always that was super cool. So Daniel, my boyhood club is the Sounders, but I watch Man City more than I watch the Sounders. So,
all right, but listen.
Anyway,
because I don't want to get blamed for this like last time. So we'll come back to all of this again. Right. But today we're talking about the GOAT.
Yes, sir.
Who lately I'm seeing is being challenged as that. So that's one of my questions. Is Pelé still the GOAT? I hear a lot of this talk about some others being his replacement. I don't know exactly where we should start. I thought, admittedly, I wanted to start with Daniel's Substack commemorative piece, because there's so much in it that as relatively short as it is, it just says a lot. Mm-hmm. But I'll defer to any of you. This is exactly what my little notes say here. A little discussion of Pelé, and maybe a quick reminder of some of the Brazilian history that Robert went over last time, just to set the context. But
I would prefer that. I think I would like to hear Robert kind of lay out the history if he has it off top, like, because I'm quite interested in that.
Yeah, I was about to say we had to start with your article, but
whichever.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be exhaustive.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think Daniel's article is certainly, in terms of the literature that came out post Pelé's death, right, in English, it's one of the best pieces I've read, because it's comprehensive, and it goes, to the heart of the matter, both personally and politically. But I mean, just to give you the quick overview from my perspective, when Pelé died, we have these crazy ideas in our head about people who are immortal. I mean, Pelé is an immortal as far as I'm concerned. He was somebody that you could actually. Oh, we lost somebody. We lost Jared.
He's there. He's there. He's
He's
there.
there.
Oh,
He's
is
there.
he? Okay.
You're good.
But when he died, it was still a shock. I mean, everybody knew that his health was bad. Everybody knew that he had been suffering for, I mean, I'd say the past 5 years. He was in precarious health. I mean, he could have died, at any time during those last 5 years of his life. He was in bad shape. One of the interesting things about his death is who didn't show up, because based on who he was, based on what he accomplished, you would have thought that there would have been a huge turnout for his funeral. Now, to give you an idea, in 1994, when Ayrton Senna died in the car crash in Italy, there were well over 1 million people came out for his funeral. I mean, it was like, a mass procession to pay homage to Ayrton Senna. And not even close to that. I mean, not even close to that happened when Pelé passed away. So there's and there were commentaries down here in the newspapers about why people didn't show up for Pelé. I mean, people did, but not to the extent that you would think that he deserved. And there are a lot of reasons for that. And I think one of the reasons is the perceived lack of political commitment and gravitas in the face of the military regime's, oppression from 1964 to 1985. That was one of the big issues with Pelé, because he didn't speak out in a forceful way during the military dictatorship. I think there are a lot of reasons for that. We should talk about that. But one of the other things about Pelé is, and the only analogy that comes to mind is Michael Jordan. Like, I don't know how you guys feel about Michael Jordan, but, in some sense, there are parallels there. I mean, Michael Jordan is, I think, by most estimates, regardless of who you actually believe is the GOAT, he's in the conversation all the time, right? Whether he's the GOAT or it's LeBron or somebody else. But he's also, to a great extent, apolitical. Like, Michael Jordan didn't have a military dictatorship that threatened his voice. But he basically has spoken out very little about hardcore social issues, let alone bring a Marxist lens to the analysis, right? And so one of the things that's really stark about Brazil, and unless you live here and spend a lot of time here, you probably wouldn't know, but the two overriding thrusts politically in Brazil are Marx and a neoliberal critique of society and reality. Those are the two overriding themes that are present in Brazil. And when Pelé played, and not a lot of people outside of Brazil know this, but he also played with another genius on the national team named Garrincha. And I'm sure some of you have heard of Garrincha. And when Pelé played with Garrincha, I think they played, I don't know, close to 80 national team games together. Their record was 79 wins, no losses and 1 tie. So anytime you had these two dudes on the field, it was like, something unworldly. And in truth, in 1962, when Pelé was hurt, because he played in the first game, he got hurt in I think the second game. He wasn't able to come back for the rest of the World Cup. I mean, Garrincha won that World Cup. And Garrincha, and the contrast I want to bring to the table is that when Garrincha played in Rio, right? So, and he played pretty much his whole career for Botafogo. When Botafogo was in another dimension, they were up there with Santos as the best team in the world. This is when Brazil had the best football in the world. Europe wasn't even on the radar screen in terms of the skill set. And you would go to Maracanã in the old days, and Maracanã would easily get 120, 130,000 people to a game. I've been at a game in Maracanã. Actually, I saw the final of the Brazilian National Championship with Flamengo and Atlético Mineiro in 1980, and there were 182,000 in the stadium. And it's an atmosphere of pure emotion. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because when Garrincha played, people loved Garrincha. I mean, literally loved him. There was like a passion, and people respected Pelé. There's a difference, Pelé, I don't think anybody would say that Garrincha was as good as Pelé. I don't think anybody in Brazil today would say that any player that Brazil has produced is as good as Pelé. Maradona, as far as I'm concerned, is a freak of nature. He wasn't as good as Pelé. And in some sense, he wasn't as good for the same reason that, that Messi, I don't think, was as good as Pelé, because
I was going to say your boy Wayne is in the chat.
Yeah, Wayne
is in the
I don't know.
chat.
I don't know how old Wayne is, but one of the problems with this GOAT debate is that there are a lot of young people who have taken advantage of the recent, spate of, social media, whatever you want to call it. Right? There's mass media today, and there's not a lot of film available for Pelé. I mean, you can look at the movie on Netflix, which is very good. But the fact of the matter is that when Pelé came along, when you look at, I met him personally. I saw him play when I was 15 with my dad. And I met him personally years later after he had retired a couple of times in New York. And even in the 1980s when I met him, he was 5'9", maybe 5'9.5". He was built like a brick. Okay, I mean, I don't even know how to express it. I mean, there was a physical presence when you met this man that you literally had to step back and think, I'm in the presence of some emissary from the divine. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. He had a presence, and it wasn't an offensive presence. It was just, it's like meeting, an emissary of God, I mean, this dude he just had a presence about him. And when you saw him play, there was a knowledge, not just about the game, but about himself in relation to the earth, in relation to other human beings, that he knew he was, he was there, there was a presence that just couldn't be denied. And so I'm saying that to say that, he was profoundly respected because he was categorically the best. And the reason he was the best was because he could do it from both sides. I mean, he was equally lethal with his left foot as with his right foot. He was totally, I forget what the word is when you use your feet as opposed to your hands. Ambidextrous is for the hands, right?
Right.
For the feet, I forget what the word is. But it was like, there was no, with Messi and with Maradona, they are clearly and overwhelmingly, and Garrincha as well. These are three left-footed people that you literally cannot stop. There's no way you can stop them. You know where they're going to go. You know how they're going to get there, but there's nothing you can do about it, And Pelé was like that with both feet. And so, when you think about the speed that he had, the power that he had, and the skill set, I mean, it's one of these things where, and I hate to use this analogy because it's not a good analogy, but it's kind of like the only analogy that comes to mind isn't Michael Jordan. It's Secretariat. Like there has not been a horse ever since Secretariat. There's a reason for that, right? People have been trying to breed thoroughbreds to be as good as Secretariat for decades. And they haven't gotten there. I mean, obviously with Pelé, I don't want to compare an athlete to a horse because there's some negative connotation to that.
Too late, bro. It's too late. It's too late, bro.
It's dangerous.
But the fact of the matter, I'm trying to create some distance between Pelé and what's come after, So I think it's possible for somebody to be as good, for a few years. I think Messi, in terms of statistical production, I guess the other thing I got to bring up is beauty. Now, I think Messi is a fantastic player, but in terms of beauty, I mean, I would choose Maradona every time. Aesthetically, what Maradona brought compared to what Messi brings, I just think that there's a spontaneity, a jazz-like quality to what Maradona brought to the game. I think Messi, in some sense, despite the fact that he is a pure, unadulterated genius.
See, now that's funny. I would have thought Messi is jazz and Maradona as funk, or he had more of a backbeat to him. He was more like that's just. But Mutanda,
that's really interesting. That's an interesting analogy because you're breaking it down deep with that stuff. I mean, that's some deep breakdown.
When I think about the way they look, the way they play,
being crude comparison to that breakdown. I mean, my breakdown was classical music against jazz, samba, salsa, that kind of world. I mean, you're really breaking it down with that.
Mutanda, I saw you making faces. Why is Messi better than Pelé?
It's not even that I was necessarily going to go down that route. No, what I was going to, and I don't want to, we eventually have to move to politics and Daniel's article, right?
Oh, I'm waiting. I've already got my highlights, my notes. I'm just being patient.
So, because I do have a question, there's something that Robert, that you said that I found interesting and I wanted to ask, and then I can quickly touch on Messi or Pelé and his greatness, which I do not deny. Let me first say that. I am not here to say he wasn't one of the greatest. When you said that people loved Garrincha, but they admired Pelé, right? You made that distinction.
Yeah.
Are you saying? I mean, I hear implied, or maybe I'm just. I want to ask: is that because of sort of? Well, why is that? Like, is that because Garrincha was more seen as a person of the people? And is it because of Pelé's lack of maybe?
Yeah, I think you're hitting on something. I mean, Garrincha came from what we would consider in the United States to be the ghetto. He came from the favelas. He was incredibly poor. And not only was he poor, but he suffered from polio. So his legs, because he was, didn't have proper nutrition when he was young, his legs were curved.
Wasn't one of his legs bigger or longer than the other, which created like a unique
that too. But I think that when you saw him standing, you could see the curvature in his legs, and it was clearly an abnormal curvature from malnutrition. And so, because he was from the quote unquote ghetto, favela, he was particularly admired by the people, what we call in Brazil the povo. And back in those days, the people that would go to Maracanã was the temple of football in Brazil. I mean, back in those, you have to understand the capital of Brazil was Rio, which also changed everything. When the capital left Rio, Brazil went through a major transformation. But back in those days, he was of the people. And I think one of the reasons Pelé was kind of distanced is because his skill set was so beyond the pale. He was doing things with the ball that had never, ever been done before, ever. And that it was so shocking, so almost unbelievable. And he did it at such a high level that people were just dumbstruck, and I think that there was mass, kind of like an unbelievableness to what he was doing, I guess the other thing, the last point I wanted to make too was, and I think this is the real distinguishing characteristic between Pelé and the other people that are going for the quote unquote GOAT title. I mean, there is no question about the fact that Pelé played with a cast of characters on the field with him, both at Santos and on the national team, that was far more impressive in terms of their skill set than any team that played with Maradona or Cristiano Ronaldo or even Maradona. I mean, the supporting cast that Pelé played with were basically people that probably would have won the World Cup without him. And so he became this monstrous maestro because of who he was playing with, and the only analogy that comes to mind is something like, Magic Johnson playing with, the team with Kareem, Abdul-Jabbar, or maybe the dream team that went to the 92 Barcelona Olympics. It was that kind of thing. And I might add, before I keep quiet, with that 1970 team, which you can see on YouTube videos, there was a person on the 1970 team that didn't make it. So the 1970 team is by most accounts, at least offensively, the best team that's ever gone to the World Cup. And there was a person that did not make that team named Ademir da Guia, who played for Palmeiras, who was a freak of nature. Freak. He didn't make the team. And the only equivalent that I can think of is when Isaiah Thomas didn't make the dream team. That's how good he was. And he didn't make that team.
He met the criteria to be selected.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, just so we're clear, Isaiah was kept off the team by Jordan and his machinations. This was not some.
I met the criteria to be selected, but I wasn't.
Oh, that's right.
That's what he said.
That's right. Sorry, that's right. You're right. My bad. Right on. That's what he said.
Yeah, I mean, you can argue all you. I mean, obviously, you can't. I mean, I'm an admirer of that team. That was a 92 team that went to Barcelona, was a killer team, and
it needed
John Stockton was a bad motherfucker. I mean, I don't care what you say about John Stockton. He was a bad man.
I don't care what you say about John Stockton.
I don't think he was as good as Isaiah Thomas. Okay, I don't think he was better than Isaiah Thomas. I would, I would, and the only reason he was there was because, Karl Malone wanted him there.
Well, I think
Jordan
Stockton was
didn't-
nice. Let's not. I don't want to
Yeah,
be
no, he was good,
disrespectful
man. He was,
entirely,
yeah.
but let's be clear.
know.
Let's be clear. But the real reason was they had to make room for Christian Laettner.
It's a quota. There was
Yeah,
a
that's-
quota.
that's
Let's be
all
honest.
true.
There was a
Yeah.
quota. They needed
Yeah.
enough.
Oh, they were not going to send 18 black men over there to beat up the whole of Europe. They weren't going to do that. No, clearly. Well, 18 plus Bird.
Yeah, well, Bird. A lot of people talking about Bird passing for white. So who knows?
That's really what it is. Let's tell the truth.
Bird was the biggest trash talker on the team.
Yeah. He was
So
a
they
trash
say.
talker for sure.
So they say.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a total
And he did
trash talker.
scrap. He did scrap too. Now Bird put his hands up.
He was a bad man.
He put his hand. I will respect that. He was as they say sometimes. He was a real white when it came.
Was it him and Dr. J that fought?
Him and Dr. J.
Yeah, he had a fight with Dr. J.
Him and what's his name? The Lambier. Him and
Oh, yeah.
Bird had a number. Bird put hands on people. There was a number, and then don't forget, like he threw the ball at a couple players. Like he was no punk.
Yeah.
But okay.
Can we get to Mutanda? Like Mutanda had a thought about Messi.
Yeah.
I want to hear this Messi GOAT stuff.
What is the argument that people say? Yeah, why is he better than Pelé?
Again, don't put words in my mouth. Yeah, I didn't say that necessarily, but as a starting point, I didn't say that. A part of me believes it for this reason. My argument with all of these things has to be, it goes to the sports science argument of it, really, and just the like what we know about the sport. So football hasn't, like, even when Pelé played, now there are a bunch of things that are different. I think everybody can agree with that. Number one, and I use this, and I spoke on this with Daniel, like, even when you just look at one position in the game, the goalkeeper, okay, and you look at the difference in the goalkeeper and the evolution of the goalkeeper in the game, it shows you how different, and I will say, a degree of difficulty now in today's game that wasn't there when Pelé played. And again, that's not, I think that's objectively true, because you can look at, like, the rule changes, for example, right? That allow that make the goalkeeper have to be more diverse in their skill set. Added to that, when I make the sports science argument, when I say that, and what you say, Robert, about Pelé's physicality and presence, obviously I wasn't as fortunate to see him and meet him in person. But even that, I find that an interesting argument as well that you make when you say that he played with all these incredible stars on that 70 team. And it seems like you're using that to bolster the argument that he became this, right? When a lot of people go the other way. They say, oh, this person can't be the greatest because they played with so many great players, as if that somehow diminishes them, right? I'm not making that argument, but I just find that that's interesting that you say that. Because when I come to some of these other players playing today, like, for example, a Messi, when I talk about Messi being, in my eyes, certainly the best I've seen. Again, I didn't see Pelé live. Messi, for me, in a day and age when athletes by and large are better, what they're given is obviously a lot. And then when it comes to the defenses and how they're set up to nullify what they do. Now, I understand people will say, okay, physically, Pelé was dealt with a certain way, and even Maradona, right? People, the tackles that they faced. And I'll say, yes. And also, I'm looking at those videos and how people are defending, and sometimes the tackling is just straight out stupid. One, like, they're sliding in situations where you're like, why are you sliding in there? That's one. Two, I think objectively we can all say that the sport is better when your best players are not being hacked down indiscriminately. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, we should not want that for anybody. Protect your best players. Please.
We should talk about this and have a separate session just on that issue.
Wait, fair enough, but that should happen. But then also, I would say that, like, it's not like Messi is being treated with like kiddie gloves. When you look at some of the tackles and some of there's a video out there. There are tons, but a YouTube video that's fascinating for Messi is, I think you can type in like Messi versus 3 players or something like that. There's like a 10-minute compilation of this dude dribbling against 3 players who are physical specimens, and the whole defense is designed to stop him. and he still finds a way. So I guess the best way I would describe it is, in a day and age when I talk about the laws of football being like space and time are constants, right? And the game is so hard to play because the space and the time that you have is diminished at top level. And yet you have a player in Messi who's able to exploit space and time better than just about anybody in this generation. And he displaces defenders. The best way I've heard describe it was from a former teammate of mine who said Messi displaces defenders better than any player in the world, right? Meaning he's able to dribble past and or play passes and beat multiple players, 5-6 players taken out of a play because of one moment of brilliance from Messi. I haven't seen it. You see it from people like Pelé, from Maradona. These are things that connect the greats. But for me, I put Messi on a level, above, like, for example, Maradona, also because of the longevity of a Messi, which is maybe unfair when you talk about Pelé because of other things that weren't his fault. But again, for me, it's more just the sports science of it to say, like, what Messi has done in terms of playing the game at this level is just
Right. The only thing that gives me pause about what you're saying about sports science is the word science. Because anytime I think about the word science, I think about eugenics. So I want to be careful about using the word science. But one of the things I do want to point out is that we are talking about, in terms of comparison, of athletes, right?
Mm-hmm.
If Maradona and Messi are from Argentina, Pelé from Brazil, anybody from Europe you're talking about in this debate?
Well, what's your point though? Because
my point is this, because you talked about players getting hacked and brought down and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something I talk about in the book. This sport is a European sport following European rules. And there's a big debate in Brazil about what's called futebol força, which is basically force football,
and art,
which is European football, and futebol arte, which is football as an art form. And futebol arte is clearly from Brazil and to some lesser extent Argentina, maybe even Uruguay. Uruguay has fallen off the map in a big way for other reasons. But one of the things that bothers me immensely about this sport is how much this sport tolerates the bringing down to the ground of its best athletes, of its best performers. And you can see this on, YouTube. You can go to the 82 World Cup. You can look at what, people did to Maradona during the 82 World Cup, what they did to Zico. And a lot of people don't even talk about Zico. I don't know if you guys have heard of Zico, but what they did to those players and what they did to Pelé in the 1960s. 1962, they literally hacked him out of the tournament. In 66, when they played the World Cup in England, I mean, it was obvious that he was going to be hacked out of the World Cup because they did not want Brazil to win a third World Cup in a row. He was hacked out, And the reason I'm bothered by this is because there's an organization side by side with FIFA called IFAB. I think it's called the International Federation of something for Rules. But it's basically the organization that makes the rules of the game. FIFA doesn't make the rules of the game alone. It's IFAB that makes the rules. And IFAB is consisting of, if I'm not mistaken, the UK, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. Right? 4 countries from the UK system basically control the rules of the game. Now, this is, from my perspective, a remnant of colonialism. It is completely unacceptable for this game. Why should 4 countries, all of them from the UK, quote unquote, umbrella, govern the rules of this sport. Aside from the question of why is this sport centered in Europe? I mean, the center of the world for football is Europe. Everybody gets up and interested and very happy and what have you, and attention paying when the World Cup comes around. But for the other 3 years and 11 months, the entire football world is focused on Europe. And so what I'm saying is we have a colonial legacy with this sport that we ignore. And part of that colonial legacy is literally in the rules and the way the rules are applied. And the rules are applied to make sure that the best talent that plays this sport, which oftentimes doesn't come from Europe, comes from outside of Europe, are basically taken down and hacked down to the ground. And there are no consequences to these fouls. People get up, you spot the ball again, and you kick the ball and go forward. So I think that there's something with the rules that basically marginalizes, quite frankly, black and brown players. That's what happens.
Can I add that the first time yellow and red cards were used were in the 1970 World Cup?
1970.
So
exactly.
every year before 1970, which is the majority of Pele's career, nobody got booked for anything. They didn't exist.
Exactly.
So that's interesting.
Yeah, but the only pushback I would have to that, and because I agree with all, like, I understand the colonial reality, and what I'm saying though is like, and you're actually, but that in a way that's supporting. The only argument I'm making is that I think that we can put. There are players coming after Pelé that we can put on a similar pedestal as far as their, you could say, GOAT status in the game, at least for their generation, because it is hard to compare eras. But if Pelé, God knows what it must have been like to be, and we'll get into it, right, with Daniel's article, but to be that gifted, young, gifted, and black, right, in that time, and at this sport, to be him must have been, I can't even imagine it.
Yes.
But what I'm saying though is that the treatment that he got, certainly Messi doesn't have the same skin and doesn't, have a lot of the same. But in terms of the footballing aspect, in terms of the abuse, and Messi, you talk about Pelé being built a certain way, Messi's smaller, right?
Yes.
He's smaller. So if we just talk football now, him being physically less imposing means that he has to have something up here. Not saying that up here was greater than Pelé, but it just means that to survive the game, just to survive it, right, up here must be light years ahead of anyone else playing. And this is what you see, right? And you can even see it now in MLS when clearly Messi's legs have gone. Everybody's known that for a long time. But even in MLS, he looks like he's playing the game 3-4 steps ahead. And all of the greats, regardless of the era that they play in, all of the greats have that. And I think that is, in a day and age when I make the sports science argument, and when you talk about like even the European, the fact that the game is centered in Europe, I would push back on the idea though that it's a European sport because everybody plays, and it's European because it's capitalism, right? And the fact that all the European leagues are populated with people from around the world, right? And all the top players, like it or not, want to get there because it's a big payday. So Brazilian talent, you've written about this, Robert. You know about this more so than anyone, right? The flow of Brazilian talent there, the flow of African talent there is incredible, right? So the fact that you have all these players concentrated in one place, the fact that the game is as physical and as fast as it is, and then the fact that you have this little 5'6", Argentinian dude, like bamboozling everybody for damn near a decade or more is remarkable. It's remarkable.
Well, I totally agree. I totally agree with you. I think you're hitting the nail on the head. I think you're hitting the nail on the head. I mean, I think that's absolutely true. I think Messi is the first, and I think Cristiano Ronaldo is also up there. I think that they're the two players.
They're in separate. No, I'm saying, no, I'll
hold
borrow
on,
this
hold
skill
on.
for
Let me
history.
complete
Trigger them.
let me complete my thought. Let me
Sorry,
complete my
all
thought. Okay, both of those players were able to maintain their physicality,
Yes,
their
that's true.
bodies,
Yeah.
in good shape, and in general, they did not lose huge amounts of time with injuries during their entire careers. They were incredibly durable, both of them,
Mhm.
right? And I don't want to get into the Cristiano debate with Messi and what have you, but I think that those two survived the brutality of the sport in admirable fashion. Maradona, as you probably remember, when he left, Argentina to go to Europe to play, I mean, the first team really was Barcelona. What happened when he got there? They broke his leg, literally broke his leg. He was out for the entire season, So, and of course, this is in the 1980s, things were different, however you want to slice and dice it. But the fact of the matter is that when we look at, the Ballon d'Or, if you take Cristiano Ronaldo out of the best player of the year award, and you look at who's won that title, best player in the world, over the past 25 or 30 years, how many Europeans have won that title? Maybe one or two. They've all
Modric.
come from
Modric.
Modric,
Benzema.
Benzema,
But he's
Cannavaro.
Algerian. He's
Cannavaro
Algerian.
Yes, yeah, that's not a European.
That's what I
He's
said,
not a
Benzema.
European. Benzema's not a European.
Oh, yeah, that's true. He's Algerian. Fair enough.
The French can't have him.
Cannavaro won it. He's Italian.
I think
But
Cristiano
everybody
was
else-
born just as an aside. I think Cristiano was born closer to Africa than he was Portugal.
I think
But
he was
that's
born.
an aside.
Wasn't he born in the Canary Islands or something like that? I'm not sure.
Madeira, I believe.
Madeira, which is like off the coast, I think.
It's off the coast of Portugal.
It's
right.
closer to Morocco, I think, than it is to Portugal. But that's
Yeah.
just an aside.
Yeah.
claim-
But I mean,
Send
you
her,
know.
Afra. Send her. You are
Afra,
right.
I
You're
think
always
you're right,
right.
man. We need a
You're
woman in
always
this.
right.
There's no question. A woman here would be fantastic. I don't know
Three
who
of
that
us
would
can't
be.
even go to the barber shop anymore. We don't even have that excuse.
I don't know who that would be,
That's
but I would
low.
love to have
That's
a
low.
woman in this discussion. Maybe you can get.
I could go. It would just be pointless.
But all jokes aside, well, all jokes aside, I also don't think in every instance, if you have four men talking, that it is always wrong or bad either. So
No,
I'm always happy to have more women around, but at the same time, I just don't think automatically we're doing something wrong by gathering here to have this conversation. Just humbly.
No, I totally agree with you. Although, one of the challenges of both men and women in the United States, and please don't take offense at what I'm about to say.
Uh-oh.
Okay, here it comes.
Damn.
Okay. So I grew up in the United States, right? And I'm older than you guys, so bear with me. But I grew up, basically in inner city St. Louis at a time when the sport that dominated the United States was baseball. Right? The NBA was just beginning. The NFL hadn't really found its niche with television yet, and the overwhelmingly dominant sport was baseball. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because as a kid growing up, I followed three sports, basically American football, basketball, and baseball. But baseball was my first sport. That was the sport that I liked the most. But as I grew up, because of the fact that I lived in the inner city, basketball became my sport. And I followed basketball very closely. And if you grew up in the United States in the 50s and 60s and 70s, you know that there are incredible freaks of nature who have played basketball in the United States who are completely unknown outside of the United States. Completely unknown, you know? George McGinnis. I mean, all kinds of names pop up, what was the name of the brother that went to North Carolina State?
David Thompson.
David Thompson. I mean, I don't know if you guys remember David Thompson when he played college, but man, David Thompson, God, I mean, he was a freak of nature, Right?
ESPN Classic got me, bro.
Yeah, and nobody outside the United States would have a clue about who is David Thompson. The reason I'm bringing that up is because the same thing is true about Brazil. Brazil has produced not tens, but literally hundreds of incredible players who are completely unknown outside of Brazil. Completely unknown. And that history is, lamentably, it hasn't really been put together. Nobody has really written a book or made a movie or a documentary, You could arguably say something parallel to that about Argentina, although they don't have the, quite frankly, the same DNA, the same depth and breadth. They don't
by choice.
Well,
that's a whole other.
My man, with the eugenics and the
That's a
science
whole
and the,
nother-
the horses and the
what happened?
DNA.
We all know.
You're killing me today.
We all know what happened to the blacks in Argentina.
Yeah, well,
right?
that's yeah.
That's another conversation.
Daniel, I saw you just go about when Robert was saying nobody's written a book or done a documentary about it. Boys trip to Brazil, do some research. And then
So,
I should also extend an invitation to all three of you.
I was about to say, how long is it going to take?
All three of you.
He's trying to get to Brazil.
I'm saying, how many podcasts we gonna have to do before Robert?
You got an extended invitation. All three of you need to come down here and get together and just hang out for a week or 10 days or whatever it is. One, just to get a feel for the culture. Since we're talking about football, obviously part of it should include a trip to Maracanã to see a game. I mean, for instance, on the 4th of November, even though no team from Rio will be in the final of the Copa Libertadores will be in Rio this year. Actually, that's not true. I just found out this morning. Fluminense is in the final of the Libertadores. I think tonight is the game between Palmeiras and Boca Juniors to see who the other finalists will be. But in any case, coming to Brazil to experience the sport is a bit like going to Mecca. I mean, that's the only analogy. Now obviously Brazil is it's going through its own macroeconomic problems and what have you, sociological problems and what have you. But in terms of a football culture, this is without question one of the places you want to go to experience football, as a shot in the vein.
Again, I am okay. Just for the sake of time, and because we're going to have to start heading towards an end at some point, but I will pick this up in our group chat because I'm fully intending for us to plan to do a live version of this show from Robert's backyard in Brazil.
Wow, heavy duty. Listen, man.
I'm just letting you know that's my intent. I don't know if it's gonna work. You can shut it down. Obviously, you shut it down if you need to. But
you guys should know that this is 2023. I think this was about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more than 10. Who came to Brazil to one of the finals? I think it was, and it was definitely Maracanã. Was Spike Lee. Spike Lee came to Rio for a final in Maracanã where Flamengo was playing, and who hosted him was a Brazilian singer and artist, an actor named Seu Jorge. Do you guys know who Seu Jorge is? Seu Jorge? No? So. You guys should know who Seu Jorge is. Have you guys seen the movie City of God.
Yeah, City of God. You about to say City of God? Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so he was an actor in that movie.
Okay.
He's also become a fantastic musician. As a matter of fact, I just wrote to a friend of mine in Atlanta last night, alerting her to the fact that Sil Georgi is in Atlanta. He has a concert in Atlanta this week. I don't know whether he's coming to the East Coast or not, but he's definitely somebody you guys should check out because he's fantastic. And he just starred in a movie in Brazil, which has largely been boycotted. And the movie is called Marighella. And of course,
okay, so I do know who you're talking about, and I did a whole video on that movie, and so I do know who you're talking about. So my only problem, and then he also played the father of Pelé in the film about Pelé. That same actor.
That I didn't see.
Yeah.
I didn't see that.
And that film does something in it that I really liked that I'm going to use now as a segue to talk about Daniel's article.
Get into it.
And to avoid talking more critically about Spike Lee, I'm gonna save that for another time. So, but that's it. You brought him up. I can't let it go. I got to at least throw that out there. But this is where, and I'll just start us here because this is what I've been really, really wanting to get to is that what Daniel has done here is. So let me just hold on a second. Let me get this straight. And then I'm going to pull this up here and I'm going to start off with, before I even get to what Daniel has done here, we got to start off with the fact that this is.
Yeah, listen, that's called my boy. You know nothing about that.
So this right here is bars to me. This part right here. First of all, to something Robert mentions earlier, in talking about Pelé, Daniel, you make the point that he wasn't Ali, who was politically that is Muhammad Ali, politically articulate and willing to be crushed in the moment. Neither was he Michael Jordan, who won't touch anything political with a barge pole. So we can come back to that. So you just say, but this is the bars. So forgive me for doing this, but I want to start here. Pelé, as Daniel writes, as Ore was optically advantageous for Brazil in every era, and that will continue after his death. A country with an African face whose government treats Afro-Brazilians as second class. Some would say, who better to speak than the king? But he was only ever king on the pitch. This is Daniel, this is bars. Football affords many things, but it can't be more powerful than the society giving it meaning. Good gracious. Sports is an appeasement, not a tool for politicization. Brazil's cultural identity is so consumed by the game Pelé was given the status of king, but without the power. Influence maybe, but power is altogether different. Like everywhere, Africans in Brazil are used for their ability to act, sing, dance, fight, run, jump, or think and rewarded as individuals, while austere politics and general contempt conspire to stifle their collective uplift. As one living outside Brazil, it is hard to place exactly where Pelé could have done internally, what Pelé could have done internally. After military rule, perhaps elevating his voice and the voice of other Afro-Brazilians in a more forceful way, but his function wasn't orchestrating the Pan-African revolution. Often plucked from poverty and given access to wealth, becoming an instrument for capital is the end game for most footballers. The sport isn't designed to do anything else. He was a billboard for Puma, Pepsi Cola, and Viagra, not a disciple of Garvey or Che. Unless hypocrisy is apparent, I'm loath to criticize someone for taking the path designed and incentivized for them. I'm sympathetic to the programming and temptation. End quote. That's bars to me, Daniel. And I know Brother Diallo tomorrow morning will be mad as hell about the ball chasing defense, but
I think we should all applaud, man, because that article, Daniel, I'm telling you, man. I mean, you killed it. You killed it, man. You killed it.
I'm bad with compliments, but one of my good friends from the UK, Paul Ensort, he just said, whenever somebody says something nice, just say thank you. So I've learned to just thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
But I think that captures a lot of what is always at issue for me is yes, on the one hand, I want famous people in position to do more and to be more radical. But on the other hand, the content, we got to be real about what their context is and what could we expect him to have done. So I would want you to flesh out, if you would, anything from that. But the point that was even touched on earlier, why was he not Muhammad Ali, but also not Michael Jordan?
Well, for me, just to give it broader context, it's always dangerous to start writing something with an idea before doing research for the idea. So I had this general broad concept of what I thought, or who I thought Pele was. And I don't know, it's my bad nature perhaps, that whenever someone passes, I'm like, everybody's going left, let me see if I can go right. Like, that's just my baseline. So I was gonna write it, and I was like, well, people are praising Pele, but really, man, he didn't do enough for Black people, man. He wasn't doing enough for African people. But then once you start reading a bit more, it's just like, well, what really could he have done given the context of what Brazil was in the 60s, 70s, up until the 80s? So the more I was reading, maybe I'm getting soft, I don't know, but I was just like, actually, like, what maneuverability did he actually have in the moment? As I said, I'm not Brazilian and I didn't grow up in the era, so somebody else could probably speak better to that, which could then maybe bring us to Ali. Ali's a specific figure who was, I mean, there's a reason why he's put on the pedestal that he was, up until the point where, you know, he couldn't speak and he was in Atlanta with the thing shaking and all of that. Like, he was willing, as I said in the piece, just to be crushed in the moment. Like, he knew what it was. He was politicized by the nation, his relationship with Malcolm, Elijah Muhammad. Like, he was willing to be broken, and he knew exactly what he was getting into. I don't know. And I don't think I've read enough about Ali. Maybe he was even a little bit ignorant or to what could have happened. I don't know. But from the outside looking in, that's what it seemed like. Pele, or maybe we could go to Jordan. Jordan, I think he knows. Like, is it Jesse Helms, who was the North Carolina senator, that he wasn't willing to say anything about? It's like, you know, Jesse Helms is a racist, but you weren't willing to say anything. The quote,
we do have to acknowledge that The Last Dance paints this a little bit differently. I just want to put it out there for whatever you believe. I don't remember exactly, but there's an updated version of this that it was falsely reported. This whole thing of
Republicans buy sneakers.
Republicans buy shoes. That he never actually said that. It was misreported.
But for all intent and purpose, your actions speak as if that's the case, whether or not you said it or not. I said Jordan doesn't touch anything politically with the barge pole. It's not entirely true, because I think, was it a few years ago, he donated $1 million to the NAACP and then decided to donate at the same time. He donated $1 million to the International Association of the Police of Chief of Police, something like that. So he's like,
Jesus
he's, you know,
Christ.
like the Solomon cutting the baby in half kind of thing, which for me is you're not doing anything of use. So for all intent and purpose, it's a barge pole. When we look at Pele, again, and this is why I wanted Robert to speak to the history of it, because I know the general history of it, but I don't know it in depth enough. Like, is there anything legitimately that Pele could have done relative to the position that he was in?
I think that's a tough question, you know. Let me give you a little bit of, you know, demographic background, right? Obviously, Brazil participated very strongly and powerfully in the slave trade. There are, at least in terms of, you know, comparative numbers, the argument is that Brazil received anywhere from 5 or 6 to 10 times as many slaves as the United States. Right? Today, years later, centuries later, the population of Brazil, which is about 215 million, maybe 220, the official number is that 55% of the Brazilian population is Black. Right? If we use the American definition of Black, it's probably 2/3. And one of the big questions, because Pelé basically, he was born in 1940. He turned professional at 15 with Santos. He was on the national team at 17. And during those years, particularly in the 50s, up till 64, Brazil was living its equivalent of a renaissance, culturally, industrially, commercially. It was taking off. The national capital officially moved to Brasilia in 1960. They were headed in a direction of progressive politics, as you probably know. And then in 64, there was a coup. And the coup was totally supported by the United States government. There were warships off the coast of Brazil in case something didn't go in the direction that they thought it should go. And the military took control in 1964 and was in control from 64 to 85. And during the period of time when Pelé got the most publicity, also happened to be the period of time when television and sports began a marriage, right? In 1960s, and kind of the first World Cup where he was really showcased in color television was the 1970 World Cup. And there was already a consensus that he was the best in the world. And in 1970, his performance was so overwhelmingly, at a level of excellence that everybody expected him to demonstrate, and he demonstrated it. So after the World Cup, and if you watch the movie on Netflix about Pelé, you will see that the military in Brazil milked that World Cup for everything they possibly could. And they milked football for everything that they possibly could for the entire period of time that they were in power. Because they knew that sport was a palliative for the people. That people would, flock to the sport, that it was a means of control. It was a means of, not so much dumbing down the population, but keeping them at bay,
Mm.
And the same thing could be said of carnival. I mean, carnival has always been a tool of people in power. I mean, it's a period of time when everybody from every walk of life, from a socioeconomic standpoint, mingles on the streets, dancing for literally, 2 weeks nonstop. It's an amazing event. And that's also something that you guys should experience at some point. But Pelé was without question the most famous person of color in Brazil, largely for his whole life. But I think the military dictatorship was, and I think it's safe to say, it was like a beehive that you don't want to poke, because you couldn't tell what would happen if you took, a position contrary to what the military wanted you to take. There were people doing that, but they were hardcore intellectuals, people who had university degrees, PhDs, masters, economists, political scientists, and of course revolutionaries as well. But they all had a foundation in revolutionary theory, basically Marxism, And Pelé did not come from a background of academics. He came from poverty, but it wasn't abject poverty. It was poverty that was working proletariat poverty. His parents were, healthy. He never had a question about food on his table. And he wasn't raised to have an intellectual grasp of what was really going on in terms of sociological issues and economics and what have you. So he did, I think, what he felt he could do. I think he felt that he was clearly, because he was dark skinned, he clearly knew and had consciousness about the role that he played in alleviating hardcore oppression against people of color. And he was aware of that without question. But the idea of speaking out, of being, a Brazilian version of Muhammad Ali and what have you, wasn't just not in the cards for him. It's not in the cards for the entirety of the Black population of Brazil. There have been no Muhammad Alis in this country. There have been no John Carloses. There have been no Kareem Abdul-Jabbars. There have been no, major athletes who were on the stage speaking out against oppression and capitalism. It did not happen. And in general, still does not happen. The interesting thing is the question I think that is fascinating is, how could a country that is overwhelmingly Black, a majority Black population, create so few people who have attempted to challenge the system? I mean, that's the real issue. How has capitalism worked its magic in Brazil in the way that it's worked it? I remember when, people, obviously, because I'm a gringo in Brazil, people often ask me, what's the difference between Brazil and the United States? And there are n number of differences. But one of the principal differences, is that in the United States, and I don't know if, your respective family backgrounds, but both of my parents went to Black colleges and universities, HBCUs. And if you look at the history of HBCUs in the United States, those colleges are largely now, in 2023, most of them are over 100 years old. Most of them. Most of them were founded in the 1800s. And that network of Black colleges, from basically the mid 1800s until today, have been the principal foundation for a Black intelligentsia in the United States. Even during Jim Crow and the worst times of the civil rights movement and what have you, always had the HBCUs producing a cadre of quote unquote Black intellectuals, however they fit within the capitalist structure, right? They were there. You had a Black middle class that was educated, whether you want to classify them as, Du Bois's talented 10th, or you want to lend, Booker T. Washington's gloss to it, however you want to class it, there was a middle class cadre of elite Black intellectuals that, at least in theory, could write, speak, and understand the King's English and speak to power, however you want to describe power in a capitalist system. In Brazil, by contrast, there was never, and there never has been, a network of Black colleges and universities. When the slaves were freed in 1888, they were literally freed and, in some kind of sense, kicked to the pavement. There was no network for them to fall back on of a Black middle class or even a white middle class that would support them. They were literally kicked to the curb. So there was no way for them to, quote unquote, right themselves. And I think this was clearly, part of the strategy of the capitalist class in Brazil to make sure that this country would never be ruled by the majority of its population.
But Robert, I'm sorry. So we I apologize for interrupting and for the fact that we have a very different understanding of this history and process. So just very quickly,
the history and process of Brazil,
of the HBCU and the impact of the HBCU on these respective struggles. So, for instance,
wait a minute. I'm not going there. I didn't address that issue. I didn't address the issue of blacks within the context of capitalism in the United States. I didn't address that issue. I just want to make that clear.
Right. But what I thought I heard you saying was that one of the reasons that we don't have a Muhammad Ali emerging in Brazil is because we don't have the capitalist class in Brazil responding in the same way as was done in the United States to create an HBCU environment that would help develop a middle class that would be the leading spokespeople for a movement that would produce a Muhammad Ali.
No, I'm saying something completely different. I'm saying something.
Oh, wow. Okay. I totally misunderstood what I heard you saying.
I'm saying something completely prior to that conceptual framework. What I'm saying to you is that there was no means to even become literate in Brazil.
Right, I'm hearing you connect
barred from reading. It was illegal to read.
Right.
So they had no means to even enter the conversation in Brazil.
Right, but that's not where. But so again, I'm hearing you suggest that literacy is involved in political engagement, and that's what I'm saying. I don't agree. That's so. I did.
You don't think literacy is involved in political engagement in the United States?
No, for instance, not in that way. For instance, for a couple of things, a couple of things off the top. Literacy was not required for the enslaved to rebel in the initial rebellions that really precipitated the so-called Civil War and the end of enslavement. Literacy was not a requirement for that. It's not that people were illiterate and didn't have an understanding of the King's English and therefore weren't able to develop a revolution. Secondly, when you say the capitalist class response in Brazil was different than here in the United States, I'm sure that's true, but I think you have it backwards. The capitalist class here in the United States is what helped create the HBCU system, specifically to create a black middle class that would prevent rebellion. So
I totally agree with you.
Okay,
I totally agree with you.
So I'll just wrap it up here by saying Muhammad Ali, just as the example that was given, is a product himself of a very uninstitutional grassroots black movement that produced not only the Malcolm X and then the Muhammad Ali, but this impetus to challenge this society, white folks included. A lot of that did not come from and would not have been developed in the HBCU system. It was developed outside the HBCU system, against which the HBCU system was developed. So this is a conversation I'd love to get into the weeds with you on. Let's put it this way. I mean, I'm looking at this from a dialectic perspective, right? There is no way that we would have a Malcolm X or a Muhammad Ali or a John Carlos or even, George Jackson or any quote unquote militant leader or the Black Panthers, right? Without HBCUs, whether they went there or not. Okay. Whether they went there or not. Okay. The HBCUs are part of the fabric of the United States. And that fabric can be accessed from inside the quote unquote confines of HBCUs and also outside. I mean, the struggle is the struggle. Okay. So if in fact you've got, Fred Hampton didn't go to college. He didn't go to an HBCU. But Fred Hampton was an educated man.
however you want to describe his education, he got educated. And had there been no HBCUs in that country, literally none, you're telling me that there would be Fred Hamptons and Muhammad Ali's?
I'm saying there would be more. I'm saying there would be
maybe.
more.
Oh, you think more? You think so?
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. Absolutely. Maybe the only reason we don't have more George Jacksons is because of HBCUs.
But see, Brazil in contradistinction to what you're saying, Brazil in some sense is proof contrary to that, right? Because we had no HBCUs in this country, and blacks are unbelievable. This is the most racist country on the planet, from my perspective. They have Brazil.
You said Brazil. He's saying
Brazil.
Right.
Brazil had no HBCUs, none. Right? The blacks were thrown into the capitalist system as it emerged in Brazil. It's still emerging. They have got no political power. They've got no economic power. There is no black middle class in Brazil to speak of.
Right, but the biggest difference.
In other words, and there have been no revolutions here.
Right, but the biggest, well, yes and no. I mean, but there have been plenty of African rebellions in Brazil. There's been.
Well, you're talking about the quilombos. You're talking about the quilombos.
I'm including them for sure, but the key difference that I think needs to be pointed out is not the HBCU. It's the proximity to power. So black people here in the United States have a different relationship to white colonial power than those in Brazil. It's a different society. So
yes.
the
Protestant and Catholic is a big part of that.
Right, but so Black America's proximity to the settler colonial metropole, so to speak, is what makes, I think, the key difference between black people here and the rest of the diaspora.
What you're saying is, so the United States as quote unquote the core of global capitalism,
and also it has a white majority settler class society that doesn't exist and didn't exist in the same way in Brazil or anywhere else outside of North America proper. So that's why I'm saying that's where I think the key difference. And I know I don't want to spend the rest. We don't have. I want to let others participate in, but I just want to. I just wanted to. I couldn't resist the pushback against the HBCU point, and I think if we center the similarities or differences on the point that I'm making, as opposed to the establishment of HBCUs, and recognize HBCUs as being a part of that proximity that I'm talking about. There was a need if white folks are saying if we're going to live this close to a newly freed population, that we have to educate them in a very specific way. And we, from top to bottom, from higher education to grade school, we need to create this middle class that you're talking about. We need to arrange this differently because they're right here. But Brazil is different. Central and South America are different in general. So that's in the diaspora. So that's, but the HBCU piece
what you're saying is
not,
so what you're saying is that Brazil took the opposite path, and I think that that's correct. I think Brazil took the opposite path in the United States. The ruling class in Brazil decided that they cannot afford to have a network of HBCUs here. They can't afford it because the majority of blacks who became educated would want to take over the entire operation here.
All right, the last point, my last attempt at identifying the difference is that's why, as we've all pointed out, the one drop rule is exactly inverted in Central and South America as opposed to here. And that's the key difference. In this country, I am black. When I go to Panama, if I go to Brazil, I'm going to be white. And
yeah, that's not an accident.
That's my point. That's
exactly.
my point.
That is not an accident.
Okay. All right.
You being white in Brazil, I mean,
But that's my point. And
that is not an accident at all. That was done on purpose.
I agree. And that's where I'm saying that's the locus of the difference between here and there, not the HBCU. The HBCU is a result of that difference.
I'm not saying that the HBCU is the fulcrum of anything. I'm just saying it's part of the dynamic.
Right.
There is no equivalent down here. I mean, part of the challenge of Brazil is that, finding people like the four of us is tough to do. To go back to football, there's not one black coach in the top division of Brazilian football. They can't even get in. They can't even get into the sport of football. Okay, they don't own any land. They don't own anything. They are on the outside looking in on the entire society.
So roughly 25 minutes or so before I really do have to go, unfortunately. But so,
let's turn it back to Daniel.
Well, I was going to ask Daniel and Mutanda to jump in here and with anything really, but
I was only gonna say I almost felt like Geechee. Almost.
Oh, that's funny. Well, because
I don't know who Geechee is. Who's Geechee?
He's making reference to our Friday show and me beefing with our other co-host Diallo. It's a very almost. Platform.
But I feel like this argument was a bit more, Well,
but Daniel, you because Robert engaged differently. That's it. So let me say this. When you talked about, I'll use this as a segue back to your article, Daniel. You talk about yourself as being a descendant from mixed parentage. So I was interested in what that exactly meant in your context, and then you relate it to what. Well, because I don't always know what that means, and everybody's. And you relate that to in talking about the context that Pelé emerges in Brazil, and part of Brazil's association with the sport and their identity being so wrapped up in the sport, as being part of this mongrel complex that one of your professors. Oh yeah, that's the.
You updated to Sonoma.
I did. Yeah. So
I got you. So first, mixed parentage is my response. Like, I don't consider myself mixed, but this it goes to the kind of the American, even Canadian context of one drop. My parents are mixed. My father is Ugandan, my mother is Scottish by way of Canada. But when I go outside, I'm not talking to the police or to anybody really like my mom's white. So I carry myself, and I was taught actually by my mother, you're black in the world, you're an African in the world. That's how I carry myself.
The beatings don't get moderated to 50% in the cop. They don't have a 50% gauge.
If the cop was going to shoot me 4 times, he doesn't shoot me twice.
He doesn't. Okay.
Yeah.
Daniel, what part are you in Canada now? Where are you based?
No, I'm in North Carolina at the moment.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I was born in Halifax though. So like when people talk about my heritage, like, yeah, my parents are mixed, like that their marriage is a mixed marriage, but I don't consider myself mixed unless I go to a country like South Africa, like Brazil, where the racial lines are a bit more blurred. Then I have to adopt a different consciousness in that context. Now I've forgotten the next point.
Well, because you were the mongrel complex.
Yes. Yeah. So I don't know. It was sometimes you just go to office hours with particular professors and you just talk. So, and because finding people who like football is kind of difficult in the States somehow. Like sometimes you just find professors who like the sport, you bring it up in class or whatever. And he was like, do you know about the mongrel complex? I was like, nah, what is that? He's like, go look it up. Because some professors are like that. They want you to go do the work and look it up. I've forgotten the guy's name. And I went and look, I was like, oh, this is really interesting. Like the idea that because Brazil lost, well, there's a long history of, how black footballers or African footballers get to play football, but eventually they become enough. Because if you look at the 1930s and 40s, there were Brazilian footballers who went to go play for Italy and in Spain. Actually, I did want to mention this. I'll circle back, but in the conversation of Messi and Maradona, one name that often gets lost in the Argentinian context is Di Stefano, who was born in Argentina but went, I believe, to Spain and became Spanish for purposes of whatever they were up to. And Italy had a similar project where Mussolini called on, Italians from the diaspora, so to speak, to come. Because the 1934 World Cup was being held in Italy and they wanted a good team and all of this and all of that. So either way. But yes, the mongrel complex. So in 1950, Brazil are hosting the World Cup. And there are African people on the team. And they lose the final in the Maracanã. I think it's the most attended game in history. I think it's like 200,000 people show up to the final and they're supposed to win. And it's supposed to be some grand event for Brazil. And they lose. The starting goalkeeper was Barbosa, who was an African. and he was effectively blamed for the loss. Even later in life, they offered him the frames of the goals, and he said that he took them to his backyard and he burned them in like some kind of protest or whatever it was. And this loss kind of created, I don't know, some sort of trigger in the minds of many Brazilians, as if, okay, we're supposed to be good at football, or football is our thing, but we keep losing. Why is this? So then people, philosophers, thinkers of the time, whatever it is, and this kind of does go to the eugenics point of science, is, well, maybe because we're mixed and there's African blood in us, that whenever we get on the big stage against a country that's more monochromatic or homogenous in that sense, we're going to lose, because the African gene will just pop out of nowhere and it'll do something erratic and dangerous. This then, 8 years later, becomes important, because when Pelé emerges looking like he looks and playing like he plays, that puts a lot of those mongrel complex ideas to bed, on the football pitch at least. But I don't know if it's ever been or will ever be, at least in my lifetime, eradicated from the larger political discussion, because this is something that me and my podcast host always talk about. It's like, so most African or most Brazilian footballers, you look at them and they're African, right? Or you can tell that there's some African there. But if you go to Wikipedia and you look up the Brazilian heads of state, it's like they're all white people or just European looking. So it's like, what is the disconnect to where the majority of the population is African or mestizo, I guess is the word, brown in some way, but like all of you guys are European? Like, what is that? And it goes to the political and, you know, sociological ramifications of what African people think that they're capable of, and the larger system that makes everybody believe the capabilities are what they are. So yeah, I'll shut up there.
No, in that film,
have you been to Brazil? Any of you guys been to Brazil?
No.
Okay.
No.
We are, though. We're all
we're coming.
We're on our way.
And Jared's gonna get Morgan State to pay for everything. So yeah.
I knew Mutanda, but when it was first mentioned, he was like, "What about the money?" That was in his head.
We might have to crowdfund that. Morgan.
Who's paying for the flight?
I can't even get the jokes together. I don't even have the jokes I can put together fast enough for that.
Well, I was making the joke about, getting the HBCUs to make sure we get
the grand HBCU.
Do some research. No, listen. So I think what's fascinating to me, and I'm going to connect this with Earn Your Liberation and ball chasing in this sense, because I did, and I don't know if Robert and Daniel, I don't know if you remember this conversation, if you were privy to this debate, if you will, that was on there one show about sort of the grace that we give, or the leeway that we give to athletes in any space for their political stances. I think, Jared, if you remember, one of the points that you made was, if and when celebrities, and especially, sports athletes, do not have or don't take political stances that are in line with revolutionaries and with the people, it's easy for us to look at them and say, "Oh, shame on you, and you should be better," right? But then also there has to be a sort of I don't know if acceptance is the right word, but definitely an interrogation of the systems in place and the movements in place, the collective movements that would have helped those athletes in their formative years arrive at a place to have better politics, right? And be in positions where they actually have access to these spaces where people are thinking and moving in a way that's conducive to a more progressive social movements. And in the absence of that, wherever people are, wherever you find yourself, in the absence of that, it's very difficult, right? I can understand how a young person coming from whatever level of poverty Pelé is coming from is now the greatest player on the planet, has everything at his feet, has all this money, and is now all of a sudden, in a situation where he's doesn't feel like he can say anything, or he doesn't know what to say. Like, I could get that, So, and that's why, Daniel, I specifically going to your article, I think you hit the nail on the head in so many aspects, and everything that Jared highlighted in terms of like the thing that stood out for me was this line: like everywhere, Africans in Brazil are used for their ability to act, sing, dance, fight, run, jump, or think, and rewarded as individuals, while austere politics and general contempt conspire to stifle their collective uplift. You can substitute Africans in Brazil for Africans in the US, right? Like, you could do that. And this is where, we brought up Ali versus, and not versus, but Ali and Pelé. And it's like, I mean, you can see even in what Ali was saying, when he was able to speak. And it's very interesting sidebar that how he was used when he lost the power of speech, and how he was viewed when he lost the power of speech. But that's a whole other thing. But you can see in Ali, in younger Ali, the spaces in which he was in and how that impacted his stances, right? Would he have spoken out against Vietnam had it not been for things he was involved in? Probably not. So when I look at Pelé again, and Robert's gone to great lengths to detail sort of the social movements there, and and how Pelé grew up, and all the people he played with, and different aspects for why he moved the way he did. While I can't speak to that, I can definitely understand how, and I appreciate the way you put it, Daniel, how far be it from me necessarily to sort of come down hard on Pelé for not taking stances that, Robert, such like you've detailed, very few people, we could say, in those athletic arenas are able to take. That being said, I still think we can be critical too of saying, hey man, you could have, like in that Netflix movie, I don't know if people have all watched that, but there are a couple points there where, and you can see the movie's not meant to critique Pelé's politics. It's not, right? But there are definitely a couple points where people say, there's one brother in there, I forget, I don't think he was a teammate of his, but there's one gentleman who talks about how he didn't like Pelé for the reason that he thought Pelé was always like kind of a yes man, right? It was kind of like, and so there's that. Which anyway, I find that fascinating. That's all I wanted to add to it. But
can I bring up also that? Oh, go for it.
Well, I did want to ask Mutanda, I to that point. I mean, to try to lean in a little bit to your professional experience that I don't think and the rest of us can appreciate in the same way. What does it feel like in that environment to? Because from the outside looking in, for instance, I took my daughter to a DC United game a couple weeks ago, and we're sitting there, and I'm trying to think as we're looking at the whole thing, the stadium, the lights, the military parade. I made sure we timed it so that we didn't walk. We were not in the stadium when the anthem was playing, because I don't even want my daughter to not stand with me, because I don't want to invite somebody to say something. I'm going to have to say this could become stupid. So I just was timing it. But I'm trying to think, we're looking at Wayne Rooney and, on the sideline, and I'm thinking about this is a superstar. And I'm thinking about, this guy is a superstar who's played on every major stage with every major player of his generation. And then I'm trying to think, how does someone go from that environment if they're not coming out of a Nation of Islam with a Malcolm X, if they're not coming out of a movement? How? That's what I was wanting to ask you. How would you even get there? What would it even look like to take some sort of any stance?
So it's hard, and I think I appreciate the question, because it's actually deeply personal for me, because obviously I'm not at the level of a Pelé or any of these players, but being a professional athlete, I understand what the locker room is like, and I understand what it's like to be in a situation where, people don't, by and large, the viewing public in pretty much every sport, I can say this definitively, right, don't really have an appreciation for what pro athletes do, because you can even see how people talk about it, and there's an idea that there's like, oh, these people are just, they're playing a hobby, or imagine if this game, this thing that kids play, of course, becomes your job, Well, now it's different. And in the locker room space, what happens is the concept of being on a team really needs to be interrogated here, right? Because when you're on a team, whatever your political leanings, whatever your, sexual orientation, all these things, right, that you have as part of your personal package that you move through the world with, what the team asks you in a professional sports setting is essentially to put that aside in some way, right? What they essentially say is, you come here and we're going to in some way strip you of that to some degree, and we're going to embed you with who we are, and we're going to go onto the field and try to win this game. Now, what we also need to actually realize, though, of course, is that if you're a Black person, or if you're a member of any marginalized group, oppressed group, obviously your team is still in a context in which there are dominant political narratives there, right? So this whole thing about sports being apolitical, no, of course it's not true. I played professionally in Canada. We before every single game had two anthems that we would normally play, because most of the teams we played were from the U.S. And so we'd hear the Star Spangled Banner, and we'd also hear the Canadian anthem. Did it mean anything to me? Absolutely not, right? But because I'm part of this team, when I step onto the field, it's like we're all in this together, and nobody, like, we have this siege mentality, and we're infused with a certain politics. We're infused with a certain way of moving through the world as this team. And if you don't sort of get with that, it's hard to survive that, right? It's hard to survive that. Now, then moving towards like the Black radical politics and all that, what's really difficult is it's so hard because, and this is where I go to the institutions themselves. When you really, really get down to the nuts and bolts of it, the two don't really mesh, right? Because to have a real, and I'll use this term, to have a race-first political analysis is so frowned upon, because it would literally tear down all of these sports institutions, right? If we're really real on it. When you look at, for example, and this is why we had our whole hand egg discussion or whatever, but like, if you had if you strip away, of course, the ridiculous patriotism, all these other things, when you look at just like a race-based analysis of what's going on here, you see that at every level of sports, of professional American football, hand egg football, you have a huge population of laborers who are predominantly Black, and you have a population of overseers, owners, etc., whatever you want to call them, who are white. And so it's hard to sort of look at that with a race-first analysis and not come to the conclusion that this is problematic, right? So I guess hopefully I answered your question, Dr. Ball, but like, how do you, so I guess I would say it this way, and what's deeply personal for me is, and Daniel, you and I started to get into this on your podcast, but for me, I guess what saved me in a way was, and I'll be brutally honest, maybe not being the best and not being in a position where I was earning a ton of money also helped me in my political leanings, right? Because God knows if I had millions and millions of dollars and I was being pulled in this way and that way, would it be harder? 100%. It would be so much harder. But what saved me is, I'm a lower level, a lower league professional player. I'm playing this game that I love, but I had to fight and claw to get there. I'm not being paid a lot, but I'm also spending time reading, and I have great mentors, and I'm in spaces that afford me and that challenge me to think about who I am in the world outside of this game, right? So I guess that's a roundabout way, Jared, of answering your question by saying I think it's very, very hard and nigh on impossible to ask people in those professional sports spaces to get something that they weren't given previously. They would have had to give them previously. And we see there are examples of professional athletes now who move differently. You can see it, especially in this younger generation. There are people, and not just Kaepernick. I think Kaepernick is a big one, but I think of even someone like, if people know, like Jaylen Brown of the Boston Celtics. is a brother who you hear him talk and you hear that his heart is in the right place. Whether he's always saying the right things and moving and doing, and you can talk about his strategy, this and that. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about he understands sort of the country he lives in and how he's not just fortunate, but it's his honor, but fortunate to occupy that space. But he knows sort of the game that's being played with him as the pawn. He knows this. And I appreciate that about him. But he's had an education that maybe other brothers haven't gotten. So anyway.
I want to get him off that Black Wall Street thing, but I get your point. But I get your point.
You get my point.
Oh, no, absolutely. Honestly, that's why I took a moment. We're sitting there, and I know my daughter was doing her own thing with what she was looking at, but I'm interpreting it, the whole thing. I'm thinking, how would unless we were doing something outside the stadium that impacts inside, and that's what I usually mean by outside movements. How would anybody in here? What could so yeah. Anyway, I appreciate that, fellas. So two things for me at least immediately in our group chat. One is arranging the accommodations at Robert's palatial estate for us, and then our next gathering here, and then I guess the third thing is, and I just confirmed it to save it. I'm gonna go check Talking Tactics with Mutanda as a special guest, and but anything we
gotta do part 2 soon. Yeah.
Of your talk
of the talk.
Yeah. Send that around. Send that around. Talking Tactics, is that the Brazilian guy?
No, this is Daniel's podcast.
That's the podcast.
Okay,
that I do with my buddy.
Okay,
yeah.
I'd love to see it. Love to hear it.
Yeah, so that's it right there.
Oh, nice, good.
Talking Tactics, and so yeah, fella, it's been great. I love this. I can't wait to do it again. I will be, as I said, reaching out almost immediately to start setting up the next round. So I thank you all very much for doing this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
you.
All right, good people. Thanks for joining us. Peace if you're willing to fight for it, like Fred Hampton used to say. Catch you next time here at I Makes What I Like in our next football round talk. Thanks again, everybody. Peace.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.